Well, I wrote it really because I wanted to summarise and reflect on 40 years of being involved in the steel industry. And I also wrote it because I wanted to write something which, as I reflected on that, I would have liked to have read when I started working in the steel industry or associated with the steel industry 40 years ago. Something which really, not only described the industry, but tried to tackle some of its issues, underlying economic challenges, had some insight, had some reflections, had some perspective. Something for I would have liked to have read when I started. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people. I'd like to read it. I'd like to sell millions of copies, but I think everybody that works in the industry, and there's probably about 10 million people who work in or around the industry, could benefit. Certainly anybody who's in an executive management position, I'd like to think that I can say something meaningful to them. There's a lot in the book about customers and service, and I think customers could benefit from reading it so they can put pressure on steel producers to be better in their service levels. I think anybody in the financial community, because the industry is not in good shape financially, and there's a lot of people in the city who either are investing in it or looking at it and providing money for it. And also, even everybody, because if you think about it, steel is 3 or 4% of world GDP. So anybody who's got a pension fund, which is being managed independently, has got some interest in steel companies. Some amount of their pension fund will be invested there. I would hope that they would see beyond today's stresses and strains and difficulties, because the industry is not in good shape. It's not performing well economically, it's not performing well financially. It's not at a high capacity utilization level, it's a low capacity utilization level. It's easy to get surrounded by those problems, to get absorbed in them. In reality, we need 3 times as much steel in 2050 as we produce today. There's a huge opportunity, a huge challenge. We need to generate capital, opportunities for young people, people who can create new steel companies in new parts of the world. We've got to rise above the current challenges, see beyond them, see what's possible, change. I've been in and around the steel industry for 40 years. In 30 of those years, the industry as a whole, excluding state-owned companies, so the industry which is dependent on capital markets, has failed to generate sufficient return on capital in 30 of those 40 years to be able to pay its shareholders something, to reward its bankers with interest, and to generate capital to grow and develop the business. It needs to make more money, to be more profitable. And that's at the heart of the book. How can that be achieved? What needs to change? It has changed. I mean, when I first started in 1974, that was just after the first oil crisis, 73. I worked a little bit in Sweden to start with, and the industry was in absolute despair. It was losing. We were just on the verge of having the Davignon plan, manifest crisis in the European steel industry. Things were falling apart. It was the end of the world. It's not that bad. In this last crisis, in this last financial recession, no major steel company has actually gone bankrupt. In the 1970s, many went bankrupt. It's much better than it was, but it's only halfway to where it needs to be. Well, I think it will change. Yeah, I think it will. I'm a great optimist. But the key to changing the industry is, of course, there's strategic change, structural change, there's real things to be done. But what will drive that is by enticing, encouraging, and appealing to young, energetic, and intelligent people to come into the industry. At the moment, anybody that's young, I'm not young anymore, but if I was now 25, would I be interested in coming into the steel industry when everybody around it is depressed? Everybody is saying it's all a part of the government, it's all about subsidies, it's all about bad competition, it's all about unfair competition. There's nothing we can do, there's very little we can do, I don't know what we can do. It's a message of despair. People are not attracted to an industry which doesn't believe in itself. How can you get young people into an industry believing in its future if the people there already don't believe in its future? That's the key. That's what's got to change. If that changes, then you get energy, you get new ideas, The emerging countries, developing countries, India, the rest of the world, fantastic energy levels, fantastic people. They will change the industry. But we need to have those people also in the developed countries. Well, it will exist because steel is necessary. It's not an option. Steel is absolutely required. It's cheap, ubiquitous, multifaceted. It's fantastically flexible. It has a whole range of alloys still to be explored. It's a fundamental factor in economic and industrial and urban development. So it has to exist. There needs to be 3 times as much of it in 2050 as there is today. So it will exist. If it doesn't change, it'll exist in a very depressed and dispiriting way because it will have to be funded by the state. It'll have to be public funds. And that generates lethargy, underperformance. We all know nationalised industries in the West, in the UK, in Europe. The process of denationalisation, privatisation has been extremely beneficial. Nationalised industries are slothful, protective. They do have unfair competition. Right? That's the way it will go, which is just a terrible, vicious circle. We need to break out of that. The industry can break out of it. The next 5 years is critical, I think. Well, yes. I mean, steel is necessary, but just look around you. Yeah, I mean, you're wearing a lapel badge. It's got a little bit of steel holding it to your pocket. Your car, your train, your buildings, everything that around us has got some steel in it. But it will gradually become less, of course, as a percentage of world GDP because new technologies emerge, information technology and so on and so forth. Even more new technologies, we can't even imagine what they'll be in the next 50 years, perhaps biotechnology and so on. So steel will become a smaller proportion of the world GDP, but it will grow in itself, and it will still be fundamental to civilized life.